Well, I wasn't going to make a video about this, but it's a project. My name's Tom, so I guess it could go in Tom's projects. Uh, some people might know what this is from this view. It's a rather odd view. This is a Commodore Amiga 1000 computer. I bought this recently off Craigslist. Facebook Marketplace. When I was growing up, I had a VIC-20, Commodore VIC-20, and then I had a Commodore 64, and then I bought a used Amiga 1000 from a guy that ran a BBS in the area. And every now and then I look on Craigslist or Facebook for Amigas for sale and toy with the idea of getting one. And I saw this one and decided to get it. It came with a bunch of stuff. I might have paid a little bit too much, but I decided I would get another project. So I have begun doing some modifications to it and cleaning. When I got it, it was filthy, absolutely disgustingly, grossly filthy. The grills here and the power supply were just filled with dark brown nicotine, dust bunny grunge. It was foul. The entire board was covered with dust and dust bunnies. The floppy drive, 3.5-inch floppy drive, full of dust bunnies and just reeked of cigarettes, and it was horrible. So I took some pictures and a video, but I ended up deleting the video because I didn't know if I was going to post it on my websites or my channel. But I've decided to go ahead and film this because one of the things I do like to do with my projects, and the reasons why I make videos, is if they might help somebody. Now this, I don't know how many people this one's going to help compared to my other videos. Not that they help a ton of people, but I figured I'd go ahead and make this video. Now, Amiga 1000, this is the back. There's normally a big metal RF shield that covers the motherboard, but this one didn't have it, nor did it have any of the screws that hold the motherboard to the plastic case. They're all gone. There's like 14 screws that are supposed to hold this thing, the RF shield and the motherboard, to the bottom of the case. I believe from looking online that they are a combination of 3mm bolts that go in areas like here, goes through the motherboard, through the power supply case, and then into the plastic case itself. And here's another small one. And then the 8mm longer ones, I believe, go here because they're going through this metal connector here, and then down through the plastic connector, and then into the motherboard. So I believe those are 8mm, 3M, like sheet metal self-tapping type of screws. Not ones that go in a nut, not like a machine screw, because they go into plastic. So M3 8mm and M3 6mm. So I might end up getting some of those just so I can keep the motherboard screwed down, although with the weight of this floppy drive, which does screw down to the case, the motherboard's not going anywhere. But that's one of the things about this certain Amiga. The other thing is there's modification right there. This I did. This is a RGB to HDMI. The Amiga puts out an RGB signal. I have a couple of flat screen TVs in the house and about 7 computer monitors, and none of them have a composite input. So I have nothing in my house that I can plug this thing into to use it for video. So this is an internal device that takes the video from the Denise chip, which is the custom chip in the Amiga that handles video. And then there's a line that goes right here to a leg on this chip that pulls a sync signal. And this CPLD transfers over to, I really don't know what I'm talking about, but I believe the CPLD takes all the inputs of the video. It transfers it to this Raspberry Pi Zero, which has a micro SD card with software that then sends out through the Raspberry Pi's mini HDMI port an HDMI signal. And by all accounts, it looks amazing if you look at the videos online. One thing I did not want to do was solder anything to this motherboard, but I did solder a pin that I connected this wire to that goes to the sync pin on this modification, because I could not get a chip clip around the leg. Chip clip is something that looks exactly like this. Let's see. So it's basically a little copper hook attached to a wire, but I could not get it around the leg of the IC because it is soldered to the board, down flat on the board, and I eventually was unbending this until it was like at a 90-degree angle, trying to get it to go into the leg so I could clip it on, but it was just not working. So I figured, okay, if I just put a little bit of solder on that leg and put a pin on it so I can run my wire, then if that ever needs to be removed, all you have to do is heat up a soldering iron, touch it to that leg for 1 second, and pull the pin off if you don't want it there. So it's the least modification I could do, since I could not get the chip clip. The other thing that I'm doing, and just finished doing, is over in this area. This came with the Amiga installed. This is a DKB Insider 2 RAM expansion card. It's fully populated, so it should be 1.5 megabytes of RAM. And it has a real-time clock that uses a lithium battery that is most likely dead. I think there's mods to change that over to a coin cell, or maybe use a different real-time clock, more modern replacement to this whole chip with batteries underneath it type thing. But I haven't decided if I'm going to mess with that or not, because my main concern was what's underneath it that just showed up today, which is this chip under here in the ceramic package, where it's got, you may be able to see the gold pins and the slightly different color than the black plastic chips. That is a CIA chip. There's 2 of them on the motherboard. They handle input, outputs, things like keyboard, joysticks, floppy drives, etc. And what I've installed is a drive selector switch modification. So first off, while we're there is a chip clip right down there, this red thing. That goes to this DKB Insider board. That's part of how it hooks up. And then it plugs into the socket where the 68,000 CPU chip goes, and the CPU chip then goes up on top here. It is touching the drive cage. That's how tight that is. There is the floppy cable that's going under it, and it's going kind of partially over this, or next to this chip, and the one next to it that sits lower and plugs in back here on the motherboard. The power from the floppy drive goes down around here, so it's not pinched in between the board and that chip. But the main thing I was worried about when I ordered this drive select modification is it's for Amiga 500 and Amiga 2000s, but the seller does have a post by someone with a picture saying that it does work on Amiga 1000s. And I was worried about the height because this DKB Insider board, I thought, was going to touch that chip. And luckily, that CIA chip just happened to be that ceramic package, which is actually a lower profile. It's a lower height than the plastic chip. So it's awesome that that just happened to come on the board. It was actually in that slot, although I'm pretty sure that the CIA chips, you can swap the two. I don't think there's a difference between the two chips on the board. I think they're both the same. But it just happens to be a smaller height. So when I add that disk selector switch in there, it's just barely clears that DKB Insider 2 board. And I could not find anything online where anybody had done this before. So that's why I was worried it wasn't going to work. I bought some lower profile pins for that drive selector switch that I thought maybe I have to take the whole thing apart and redo it. Here is what it looks like. And you can see here that it's got these pins on the bottom that plug into the original chip socket. And then on the top, you plug the original CIA chip. So this is the orientation that I've got it in this Amiga. So the wires are coming out the back that go to a switch that in one position makes an external drive DF0, which is what the Amiga boots off of. And then it doesn't see the floppy drive that's in the machine, and then flip it the other way, and the original floppy drive is DF0, and the external drive will be DF1. So the other piece to this puzzle is this. This is on the Amiga Love website. There's a thread about Amiga 1000 back panels. And there's a few different designs. You can print it if you have a big enough printer in one piece, or like I did, two pieces, which I super glued and then melted with a soldering iron together. I also covered up these two. There were two holes for USB connectors and a hole for Ethernet, and I just modified the file to plug them up so they're not there. It came with an HDMI and VGA ports. I did have to enlarge the opening for the HDMI for the HDMI cable I got, as well as shave a little bit from the inside of this, and also my HDMI cable I actually shaved because although it is rounded on the ends like this opening, it was thicker, so it didn't fit in. So I modified that, modified this, and now it fits in there and the screw holes line up with the HDMI cable, which comes out of the Raspberry Pi, which has a mini HDMI. And the HDMI to panel mount cable I got is not mini, so this came with, I think it was the Raspberry Pi. It's a mini to standard. And I don't really like it because then I plug the HDMI cable into it, and that means that it goes from being that thin to being this thick all the way back to about here, and I don't know what this component is on the motherboard, but it's raised up on legs off the motherboard, which sometimes they do that when a component gets warm, and the HDMI cable is going to be basically pretty much kind of touching it because I don't want to fold it over. I don't really want to touch it at all, but as I'm here doing it, but I'm thinking I might end up spending more time on Amazon looking for a mini HDMI to panel mount. I did find one, but it didn't have any buyers, any comments. It had a picture where it was gold plated on both ends, and then a picture where it was just the regular silver metallic on both ends. So I'm like, okay, this is just kind of weird. I don't know that I trust that particular seller of that cable to know whether it's a decent cable or not when the pictures are showing two different things. So that should work, but I might end up changing it. So that's ready to go. And as I said, that chip clears. I've currently got the wire coming out, and I just did this to get it out of the way. I will be routing this back through here now that the DKB insider board is back in. And I'll probably just maybe wrap it around this post, and it plugs into this switch here. So we've got two switches here, which barely fit together, and this one barely rises above the connector for the keyboard. And they're labeled Kickstart and DF0 Swap. Now, DF0 Swap, so as I said, one position, your external drive is DF0, and it does not see the internal drive, and the other way, the internal drive is DF0, and the external drive is DF1. This is not for a Kickstart. You can install a Kickstart, multiple Kickstart modification in this as well. So you can have a board that has two different Kickstart ROMs on it, and you can choose which one you want to boot from. But with the DKB Insider board and the DF0 switch, and up there are the bootstrap ROMs, which I think are the sockets that a Kickstart ROM adapter kit goes into. Plus, I think you have to modify the board and the daughter board to make it work. I'm not going to do that. So the Amiga 1000 history, for those that don't know, was the first Amiga when the Amiga 500 came out. And there's Amiga 2000 and 500 plus and 600 and 3000 and 4000. The Amiga 1000 came out before the actual, I guess you could call it in modern terms, the BIOS was actually ready. So instead of having BIOS chips that you would have to change if you bought the Amiga when it came out, and they came out with a new update to the BIOS, they had it installed by floppy disk. So when you turn the Amiga 1000 on, it asks for a Kickstart disk. That has basically the BIOS, the machine code, and it loads into a big daughter card, which sits on top of this. If you have an NTC Amiga, I think the PAL ones do it a little bit differently. They don't have the motherboard, but there's a big motherboard here with memory on it, and it loads the Kickstart code into that daughter board, and then you eject the Kickstart and you put in a workbench disk or a game or whatever you want to actually use. But basically the machine code is not on the motherboard, it's on a floppy disk. And so it's kind of cool because you can just put a different floppy disk with, say, version 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 3.1, and just by using a floppy disk, you can change, whereas the other versions of the Amiga, you actually would have to get some type of Kickstart switcher or more involved modification to change the actual code on the board. Another thing I did, put a label here, recapped January 28, 2025. I recapped the power supply. Everything has been cleaned as best I can. Still a little smell of smoke from some of the things like the fan. I'm not going to like submerge in water or flood with a cleaner because I don't want to break it. It runs super quiet, but it is putting out a decent amount of air, so the fan is still working great. After I recapped the power supply, I tested the voltages and they were fine. They were also fine before I recapped it. I didn't recap the board. I've read that a lot of people say you don't really need to recap them, and all these caps look fantastic. And The power supply, however, being a power supply, I figured that was something that I really wanted to take care of, because the last thing I want is the power going bad feeding into the board. So yeah, everything cleaned. So it's taken me weeks taking the pieces apart and spraying them with cleaner and rinsing them off and letting them dry. And the kickstart, or the DF0 switcher just arrived today, so now I'm putting it back together. So now that I've got clearance there and I can see that that's actually going to work perfectly, now I need to plug the daughter board in, and then I'll put the back panel on, which just slides into the case. You do have to lift up the motherboard a bit so you can get it in there, but it just kind of slides in there, and then all the ports will line up, and I'll need to screw in the HDMI cable, and then I just need to plug this into the video RGB to HDMI. You can use one button to navigate the menus. Pressing it makes the cursor go down to different items, and then when it's on the item you want, if you press and hold, it selects it. Or you can alter the code on the RGB to HDMI to use 3 buttons, and there are, on the board, there are three posts for buttons, and that way you have up, down, and select. But I'm fine with just using one button. I don't think I need to drill any extra holes in this. So this will be my video menu, which I think you only need to do when you first set it up. It goes through an auto configuration. And then, yeah, I'll just have my switch here for when I want to use the original drive as a boot drive, or the GoTech drive that I bought. This is going to be another one of my long videos. Do I have the GoTech anywhere in here that I can visibly see? No, I'm not sure where I have my GoTech. One thing I can show is this that I made. This is an Amiga drawbridge. This is not a disc. This is a PCB with the screen printing on it to make it look like a disc. There's 2 of them. There's an Arduino Pro Mini in the back, and there's a serial board here, and it hooks to a PC floppy drive. And then I have on the side of it, this side, there is a barrel jack that I hook a power adapter up with 5 volts that powers the floppy drive, and the ribbon cable does the communication. And what this is for is this lets you use software on a PC to put an Amiga disk in this just regular PC floppy drive, and it will make an image of the disk so you can back up your disks. And it also works to write disks, where you can send a file to this from your PC and it'll write a disk. Now, hopefully it worked, and this is an Amiga Twin Kick disk that will allow me to boot this Amiga with Kickstart 1.3 or 3.1. I only had 3 double density disks. I have several more high density. They're the ones that have the Write Protect tab on both sides. Double density only has it on one side. I had 3 double density disks. 2 of them failed when I was writing this file. This one worked perfectly with no errors or rewrites or re-verification. It just worked perfectly. So hopefully that will let me boot this, because otherwise all I can do is turn it on and look at the Kickstart screen and can't determine if it's working properly or if there are any problems, because all I know is it does have video, but it needs a workbench disk after it loads a kickstart disk. So that's where I'm at. Is, yeah, I will be putting the daughter board on. I will be screwing down the floppy drive, which I still can't believe the original cable fits and it's not being pinched, and the original power cable for the floppy has a nice route it can take where it's not in the way of the daughter board that goes on top of these pins and these riser pins and these riser pins, and takes up most of this area and comes directly like in contact with this DKB insider. I mean, it's like flush with this when I got the machine with this area here. So it comes around here and goes down there. So yes, my workroom is a gigantic mess. I have Amiga parts and Commodore 64 parts all over. When I bought this, it was the Amiga 1000 with an external disk drive, with the keyboard, with the mouse. It also came with a Commodore 64 in the aftermarket case made in South Australia, which you can look that up on Google if you're interested in what that is. It's basically just the guts of a regular, what they call bread bin Commodore 64. And somebody in Australia made some cases that look like the 64C, the wedge style case that looks kind of like the Amiga 500 and Commodore 128. So yeah, a Commodore 64 that was in a custom case that the seller thought was a mechanical keyboard. Didn't know it was a Commodore 64. In fact, I had to look it up to figure out what the case was because I had never seen it before. It came with a 1541 5¼ inch floppy drive for the Commodore 64. Yeah, so all they did was turn this thing on and saw the power light. So I was able to talk them down some, but not as much as I wanted to. But I did take this before I did any cleaning to my friend's house and plugged it into his monitor that has composite. He's got a couple Commodore monitors, and it booted up to the kickstart screen, and I was just like, yes, yes. And then I read online, yeah, just because you get to the kickstart screen doesn't mean it's working. The kickstart data is loaded from the floppy onto that daughter board, and then it'll tell you to insert a workbench disk. And it is very possible that the daughter board that sits in here has bad RAM on it. So the kickstart will load and it'll tell you to put a workbench disk in, but when you put the workbench disk in, it won't load it because the code from the floppy that got loaded to the daughter board got corrupted because of bad RAM chips or other ICs on the daughter board. So all I know is it's not totally dead. It does show a video image asking for the kickstart disk, which is excellent. It's now got a tested power supply that is putting out the correct voltages with all new caps, which is great. And now that that is installed, I can actually turn the thing on and plug it into one of my monitors in the house and actually see it without going to my friend's house. And now that I've got that switcher chip in, which was shipped, bought it off of eBay, and it came from England with no tracking. I had no idea that it was going to arrive today, and I didn't want to put it back together and test it, even though I have video. I should have video out now, because I would have had to tear everything apart to get that switcher down underneath the daughter card and this DKB insider board. So yeah, a lot of work going on, pieces all over the place. Finally, the only thing I have left to clean and take apart is the 1541 floppy drive for the Commodore 64. Everything else has been taken apart, cleaned, dried, and yeah, did the best I could with cleaning the drives, but the floppy drives might not work. I could have other severe issues. I just have no idea until I actually start working on it, and I am at that point. The only thing I've got left in the mail, like I said, I have a GoTech drive that is a floppy drive emulator, and it needs a cable to connect to the Amiga. Which one is it? Disk drive is this one. It needs a 23-pin male connector for the Amiga, and then the cable goes out and plugs into the Gotek drive with data and power, because power is supplied through these pins, some of these pins as well. So that cable is, as of yesterday, was in New York. It came from the Czech Republic. So this has got parts from England, and it'll have a cable from the Czech Republic. Pretty cool. And hopefully the thing works. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Not even going to apologize, it's a long video, but I will apologize that I didn't take a video, or I didn't keep the video that I started making when I first got it, showing how absolutely disgustingly filthy the thing was. It's so much better now. The way I cleaned it, I'll end on that. Every single board I cleaned with a soft bristle brush and 99% isopropyl alcohol. And that's all I used. Over the bathtub, held the board, sprayed it with alcohol, went over it with the brush, sprayed it with more alcohol all the time, brown, nasty gunk dripping off of it, and just kept brushing and spraying until the alcohol was dripping off clean, and then let everything, or took it outside and blew the components off with my air duster down there instead of using compressed air. For years I bought this DataVac duster. It's basically a vacuum cleaner that sucks air in through that bottom filter and blows it out through the front. So instead of cold compressed air that you spend money on buying can after can, this puts out actually room temperature, and then it gets warm as the motor runs longer, so kind of warmish air, and you're just paying for electricity. So yeah, blew everything dry, and everything's been sitting for days and is absolutely dry. Oh, the keyboard's the last thing that I need to... I said that the Commodore 1541 floppy disk drive is the last thing I had to take apart and clean. The keyboard for the Amiga 1000, I have currently taken apart to the point where its case is clean. It is right here, and that's what it looks like. That's what, if you look at videos online of these things, that's pretty much what they all look like. Just moisture. I'm not even thinking that's necessarily spills. I think it's just the paint that they put on them, and over time and using a keyboard for hours and hours and hours, just gunk gets in there. But yeah, the rusty looking spots are rust. So I think I am going to unsolder every single key off of it and sand the plate down, get rid of the rust, and respray paint it black, I think. If I just put the cleaned keys back on, you would hardly even know it, because you can't see very much between the keys. But I'm thinking I'm going to have to take the whole thing apart and respray it, because it's going to drive me nuts if I don't. And when I've cleaned everything else, yeah, I kind of feel like I should do that. I haven't done retro bright on anything to make it whiter, so it's just the color that it turned out after cleaning. But I will say there was far more yellowing from nicotine than just UV yellowing, so it's not as bright white as, well, it should be. It's more like an ivory, beige ivory, whatever color. It's not quite as bright as it should be. It's obviously, you know, got some UV yellowing, but I've never done retro bright, and at this point I just want to get this thing up and running and then determine from there if I want to take everything apart and set something up to do retrobrighting of large pieces somewhere. But there we go. I am over half an hour now. Thank you for anybody who stayed with me. I will be making a video of it up and running. And fingers crossed I didn't do any damage having all these parts strewn about my workroom. And hopefully the RGB to HDMI works. I don't have surface soldering equipment, so this is all surface mount chips and little resistors and a couple resistors and like 3 capacitors. Very fine detail work. Hopefully I didn't mess any of that up. Everything tones out okay, but we'll see. Wish me luck.